Welcome to Mind of the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hi, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue, media specialist for the LFA. Mind of the Forest is where we talk about the importance of managed forests and what they do for clean air, clean water, and healthy ecosystems for all sorts of wildlife. And that's why the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Mind of the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office, or you can find them online at firstsouthland.com. Our guest today is Kate Gatto, and our subject is the European Union Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR. First, let's get to know Kate a little bit. She is the Chief Strategy Officer for the National Alliance for Forest Owners. She drives the strategic direction of the organization to advance vision, mission, goals, and objectives, ensuring alignment within the organization and pursuing external opportunities for engagement through partnerships, coalitions, and alliances. Written very well. I got that from your website, so I appreciate that. Kate has joined NAFO in 2017, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you spent a decade before that with Hill and Knowlton Strategies. She also has a BA in journalism from Ole Miss and a master's in mass communications and integrated marketing communications. I think you need to agree just to say what that is, from the University of South Carolina, another SEC school. We're getting thoughts? Okay.
Yes, I made the tour.
There you go. Okay. Kate, thanks so much for joining us today. I was introduced with Kate on a Zoom meeting that included the EU folks talking about EUDR. And I know it is a subject that comes up quite often in discussions around our industry. So, Kate, we are counting on you to give us a breakdown of what this is. What's the origins of this, and give us the kind of English version of what's going on.
I will do my best, but it is very complicated because they've made it complicated. But what the law originally set out to do several years ago, discussions about this regulation started before 2020. And what they set out to do was to make sure that any products coming into the European Union do not contribute to deforestation or to forest degradation around the world. And that is a very simple premise, one that, frankly, I think any landowner in the United States would support on its face. Nobody is in forestry because they like to see deforestation occurring anywhere. Nobody is in forestry or owns land or grows trees because they like to see forests degraded. We all like to see healthy, thriving forests. So when this law first came about, we actually thought that it might be a competitive advantage for the United States and for forest landowners and forest products coming from the United States because we manage sustainably here. We have abundant forest resources. We have a track record of sustainable forest management and continuous forest cover in the United States. Our forest cover has not declined since the 1950s. Despite all of the growth in population and demands on our forests remain stable. Yeah. So we thought, given all of this good positioning and good work that we're doing here in the United States, that this may be a good thing for us, that it might cut out some of the bad actors around the world, but could benefit and incentivize sustainable forest management. But that has not been the case, unfortunately. And so, as we would say, the devil is in the details, and the devil is certainly there with this regulation. So our issue is really with how it's being implemented, not with the objectives of the law. We would certainly support the objectives of the law, but the way they've gone about implementing it has caused some real problems for sustainable forest management in the United States, but also around the world.
Yeah, it would seem that what we do in the United States is fight deforestation. I mean, We in intro, I say to keep forests as forests. And yes, every state, every area has to have land to grow. Cities will expand. But even cities now with urban forestry have greater canopies than they did of old. So that is, I think, in the consciousness of folks in the United States, especially in the Southeast where we are. So why has it become so complicated? I mean, if we have evidence that shows we have the same amount of forest now as we did 60, 70, 80 years ago, why it seems like we're penalized. Why is that?
That's exactly right. Well, I think what has occurred, the EUDR is essentially using trade policy to advance an environmental policy. At its core, those are the levers that they're using. And so they have a block of nations that has significant economic impact and influence on global markets around the world. And so they set out to use that block to influence the environmental changes that they want to see. And the way somebody described it to me was that the United States was never the problem. We were never the problem that they were trying to solve, but we are collateral damage. And so when you invoke trade policy to advance anything, whether it's an environmental agenda or not, it has to be equally applied. And so they can't have special treatment for one country and not another country. So to make sure that it is WTO compliant, that it is compliant with the laws of the World Trade Organization, they have to make sure that they're treating everybody equitably. And so they went through a process to determine the level of risk, deforestation risk around the world. They determined that deforestation was largely occurring in only 9 countries. The United States was not one of them. And they went through a risk designation exercise, and the United States was determined to be a low risk country for deforestation, as it should be, to your point. Because we have a great track record. We have a great cultural an ethos around forest management and land stewardship here. But it is not driven by regulation in the way that it is in the European Union. And so the European Union, if you remember your history, the Europeans actually came to the United States. And one of the things that they were most excited about discovering here was these big, tall trees that they used for their ship masts. And so the Europeans really ran out of trees a long time ago. Now they have some sustainable forestry, places like Finland, Sweden, and those are really wonderful examples of sustainable forestry on the world stage. But so is the United States, but we do it a little bit differently. And here, our decisions about land ownership and land management are really driven by the market and by the culture, to your point. And so people choose to have a forest. And one of the reasons they choose to have a forest is it grows in value over time. It's a pretty safe investment. You know, you can send your kids to college on a forest if you manage it appropriately. That's certainly how I went to college. And I'm grateful for it. But that is not how policymakers in the European Union see forestry in the rest of the world. And so that is the problem, is that this market-driven kind of cultural land stewardship that we have here is quite literally a foreign concept. And so they don't understand, unless it's regulated, how we're keeping our forests as they are. And they're thinking about the worst actors in the world. You know, they're thinking about palm oil plantations in Indonesia. They're thinking about deforestation in the Amazon. We don't like that either. But they're projecting kind of the European point of view on forestry, which is very ironic, given the fact that they don't have that many forests left, onto the rest of the world. And they're doing it with the worst case examples in mind. And so we're in a situation where we have to differentiate U.S. forests and how forest decisions are made here. We have to kind of make our own case, because we're a unique situation where the markets really drive the incentives for forest owners to keep their land forested.
And it drives them how they practice forestry as well, not just growing trees, but how they're going to do it. Well, I guess maybe I'm used to politics in the United States in that, if somebody doesn't want to do something, they have a way of carving out somebody that doesn't necessarily qualify, if you will, or is it necessarily going to be burdened with certain regulations? That's done all the time on all levels of government, it seems. So why are the Europeans so staunchly set about approaching the bad actors rather than those who are doing it right?
Well, they've got an implementation problem, but really what they've got, you've put your finger on it, is a political problem. So this law, this regulation was passed under the last mandate, and it's being implemented under a new set of policymakers. The same people are in the commission, which wrote the law, but they're new people in Parliament and they're new people in the European Council. And those are their three branches of government. And the political problem, it would be like a regulation passing here under the Biden administration, but being implemented by a Republican Congress. If the European Commission reopens the law to make significant changes, which they need to do because there are fundamental flaws in this piece of legislation. If they reopen it, the political powers that be right now would absolutely kill this law. And so this is the landmark law under the package of environmental regulations that they called the Green Deal under the last mandate. And so this is kind of the last bastion of environmentalism that the folks on the left and the center left are hanging on to. And those that are very concerned about environmental policy, about global deforestation, they are hanging on to this law tight because it is the one law that remains intact, that remains under the Green Deal as it was considered and passed under the last mandate. Europe has since moved much further to the right. Really? And so if the European Commission that is in charge of implementing this law, if they reopen it, the law then goes before the other branches of government to be approved. And that provides the opportunity for those other branches of government to kill it. And that's exactly what they would do if they were given the opportunity. This law has been plagued with problems since the beginning. So really what we have here is a political problem. And it is not, the problems are not around the objectives of the law. It's not about what's in scope or out of scope. It's very simply a political problem. They have not done the homework required to pass a regulation of this magnitude. The European Union has gone out on a limb to pass an environmental law that is fully intended to have global impacts. And if you do that, there is an inherent responsibility to make sure that you do no harm all around the world, because the law that you've passed has global impacts. And they have not done their homework. At the core of it, they do not understand how supply chains work around the world. And that is the issue in implementation that we continue to deal with. They do not understand forest ownership patterns in the United States or elsewhere. They do not understand how interconnected and interdependent the supply chains are around forest products. They do not understand how decisions are made from the landowner forward. And so if you don't understand that, it is very hard to create a law that does not create unintended consequences. And here in the United States, I firmly believe that they have a huge blind spot. They do not understand how market-driven decisions are made and how taking away an important global market really does trickle all the way back down to the landowner. And it puts additional pressure on that landowner at the exact time they're considering, should I reinvest in this forest or not? When you harvest your material, if you can't find a buyer or you don't get a good price for your wood and fiber, you are much less likely to say, I'm going to do this for another 25, 30, 40, 50 years. So they're hitting a landowner when they are at their most sensitive for forest conversion. The irony of it is this deforestation law being driven by the European Union is very likely to drive forest conversion here in the United States. And that's what we're trying to get them to see.
Wow. Well, first of all, it would seem counterproductive to create not only legislation, but just a regulation details that's going to harm long-established partnerships across the oceans. And it's confusing to me. Why would you want to cut off the nose to spite your face? It doesn't make any sense. Is it that staunch environmentalism that doesn't look elsewhere of normal scientific practices like what the United States does to keep forests healthy? I mean, did they just ignore that altogether?
I think trade is a very important consideration that has a lot of people in the European Union nervous. Mm-hmm. The relationship with the United States and with other countries, New Zealand, Canada, none of the highly forested, low-risk countries where the European Union gets its fiber and wood from, none of us are happy. So this is not just about the United States. Very few of our colleagues around the world are very happy about this because it's a ham-handed implementation and there's no nuance. So a forest owner in a low-risk country like the United States has to meet the exact same compliance requirements as a forest owner in Brazil or China or a high-risk country like Russia or North Korea. So there is no flexibility in the system for what is required from the landowner. And I think that is where they have gone wrong. I think what's happened in the course of the political discussion around this law is that the European Union has simplified the regulation for itself, for those operating within its own borders. But they have not taken the time to understand the issues that are occurring outside of the European Union's borders. And so all they have to do is look. This law is largely in compliance in the United States. We didn't know if there would be a delay last year, and there ultimately was. And so most forest owners, most exporters, those that are exporting to the European Union or elsewhere, have already had to be compliant. So all they needed to do was look to see, is this what we really intended or not? And I think the reality is that the small landowners, the indigenous communities, the small sawmills, the medium-sized small sawmills, they are the ones that will have the most trouble with compliance. This is no longer about the sustainability of the resource. This is about whether or not you have the resources to comply, because it's very expensive and it's very complicated.
Let's talk a little bit about those regulations. What are some of those requirements that landowners have to overcome?
So there are two main compliance parts of this law. Mm-hmm. One is proving that you are not driving deforestation, and one is proving that you're not degrading your forest. So deforestation is a little bit easier. You have to confirm that you are going to replant or regenerate your forest, or if your harvest is part of a conversion, land conversion of some sort. What the European Union is focused on is preventing the conversion from forest to agriculture. So if you are cutting down your forest and selling it to a developer to be turned into a neighborhood, you're okay. Your wood is still compliant. But if you are cutting down your forest to expand maybe cattle grazing, pasture land, something like that, or to plant blueberries or to plant an agricultural commodity, that is considered non-compliant under this law. So the irony is that they're not even concerned about all forest conversion. They are only concerned about conversion from forest to ag land. And then in the United States, the U.S. Forest Service has estimated that only about 0.02% of forests are converted to agriculture. We're talking about a very small amount of forests in the United States that are going into agriculture. So the good news is if you have your land forested and you want to keep it forested, you're on good footing there. The bad news is if you're trying to change your land use from forest to ag, you would be considered non-compliant, and you would probably have trouble finding a customer for it.
So
the second piece. Go ahead.
Sorry. I have to.
Please.
That is just absolutely mind blowing. So, if I have 300 acres of forested land and I'm going to sell 100 acres to put, and I know this is kind of a small consider, to put a solar panel field, that's okay.
You're fine.
That's okay. But if I wanted to convert 100 acres into a small truck farm to provide produce to the region, that's not okay.
Correct. Don't shoot the messenger.
No, I'm not. No. But I'm absolutely astounded that that does not make sense. Something like a solar farm is going to kill everything, wildlife, whatever's there. If it's at least some sort of agricultural land, they're not going to kill all the wildlife. Well,
but keep in mind what they're trying to prevent. They're trying to prevent deforestation in the Amazon. So grazing for cattle and things like that, taking the place of some really ecologically important forests down there. Or they're trying to prevent people from cutting down naturally regenerating or natural forests in Indonesia and planting palm oil plantations. That's what this law is really about. And like I said before, we are collateral damage. We are not the target, but we are not the target.
Well, heaven forbid a country be able to provide food for its folks by
Exactly.
Eliminating some forests and maybe trying to grow forests in other areas. I understand doing away with it forever. That's not what we want to do. But at the same time, a population has to be fed in some way.
It is myopic and short-sighted, and it is not based on how decisions are made on the ground by people that own land and decide what to do about it. It is completely counterintuitive to how we operate here. Yeah. And so that's why it's important that landowners understand what is actually required. If you are planting down your trees to plant blueberries, that is considered non-compliant under EUDR. If you want to cut down your trees and build a development, a neighborhood, solar panels, anything like that, you're A-okay.
Wow. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to clarify that because that just did not settle in my brain as anything making sense.
You're keeping up then. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
And then the second piece is really around forest degradation. This is a bit more confusing, but in the simplest of terms, this is about converting from one forest type to another. And there are many forest degradation pathways that would trigger forest degradation under this law. But the one that is most relevant in the United States and certainly the Southeast, landowners in Louisiana for sure, would be converting from naturally regenerating forest to a plantation forest. That triggers forest degradation under this law. Now, there is exclusion criteria that we have managed to get into some of the guidance documents that help us make heads or tails of this law that doesn't make sense. And so the exclusion criteria provides cover for pretty much any kind of sustainable forest management that's done in the United States. So if you are third-party certified, if you're doing some kind of ecosystem restoration, if your forest at stand maturity would resemble what would grow there naturally, you are on good footing. So if you're practicing sustainable forestry in the United States, we do believe that the exclusion criteria provides enough latitude for us to continue to practice forestry the way that we do here. But I would recommend that landowners be very clear on what the exclusion criteria is. I won't go through it here because it's so esoteric and weedy, but I will make sure that you have it in case you'd like to send it out.
Great. Yeah, we can make a PDF document and include it with the website. Everyone wants to download it and take a look at it.
Yeah.
So forest degradation. So The plantations that are planted in Louisiana after a clear cut would not qualify. Is that correct?
So there is a time element. The cutoff date is December 31st of 2020. So if it was classified as a plantation forest before that, and you clear cut it and you replant it as a plantation, you're okay. Everything that comes off of your land is compliant. Yeah. But if after 2020, for example, maybe you bought a piece of land that had been left alone for several decades, you will want to take a very specific look at the exclusion criteria, because the European Commission could consider that naturally regenerating. And if you clean it up and make it productive, turn it into a plantation forest, that could very well trigger forest degradation under this law. And so it's very important to look at the exclusion criteria to make sure you're checking those boxes. So there's a time element with forest degradation. And like I said, I think that the exclusion criteria provides quite a bit of latitude, that in the Southeast, for example, most of the sustainable forestry that's done in the Southeast, there is ecosystem restoration occurring. There is wildlife habitat being conserved, improved, strengthened. There is a good case to be made for most of the sustainable forestry that's done in the Southeast in particular to get around that very specific requirement.
Wow. So the best management practices that loggers do fit into that law well. We're preserving the streamside management zones and things like that. So all that's good. But once you get past what they do to protect those areas, then it can only be regenerated naturally. It can't be replanted. And
you can replant. But it depends on if the harvest induces a change in forest type. So if you're going from plantation to plantation, no problem. If you're going to planted to plantation, no problem. But if you start as a naturally regenerating stand, you do a harvest, and then you plant it as a plantation, you could very well trigger degradation under this law. And so you want to make sure you've got your I's dotted and T's crossed on the exclusion criteria.
Okay. So if you've had plantations already, you can replant those plantations in the normal cycle of harvest.
Exactly. Oh. Yes. And so many in the Southeast, especially, many of the plantations have been plantations for a long time now, and all of those will be okay. So it really has to do with that cutoff date of December 31st, 2020.
The mills that operate throughout the United States, they sell their products worldwide. I don't know that they can distinguish that, well, these trees that were harvested in Louisiana and made into the product in Louisiana will sell only these to these countries or in the United States. I mean, I don't think they operate that minutely when it comes to their product, do they? I mean, how can you tell?
You can't. I mean, that's the issue. So the reality of the situation is that anything that's entering the European Union has to be compliant at the moment it crosses into the European Union. So the most direct route that harvested wood and fiber would take into the European Union, most of what we export is fluff pulp, what you would make diapers or sanitary products with, and also pellets for energy production. So those are the two main exports that are impacted by this law. But because, paper mills, because pellet mills, they buy, pre-commercial thinning material directly from landowners. They also buy residuals from sawmills. We don't know where it will end up because the supply chain is so interconnected and interdependent. When a landowner harvests their forest, they don't know where all the wood and fiber will end up. And so they have to be compliant from the forest forward into the supply chain, because all of the companies along the supply chain want the opportunity to sell their residuals or their fiber into the European market. Now, the European Union gets about 75% of its fluff pulp from the United States. And so as this rolls out, it is becoming very clear that the prices on European consumers are going to go up considerably. And that's going to create another political problem within the European Union. But for landowners, we don't know where our wood and fiber is going to end up. So whether you think you're going into a product that's being exported to the European Union or not, it doesn't matter. Most of the supply chain is having to comply with this law because of the way that it's set up. And beyond that, we have some members on the West Coast that are selling, chips and other materials to Japan, to the Pacific Rim. They also have to be EUDR compliant because of the way global supply chains work. Those Japanese customers, the customers on the Pacific Rim, they want the opportunity to sell into the European Union. So the law is working out in some ways exactly the way they designed it. They want it to have a global impact. Wow. The problem is they have not done their due diligence to make sure that it's having the right global impact.
So a Japanese company buys chips from California forests and ship them over there. They make their products and they want to sell them in the European market, and they are required to go back all the way to California to find out where that wood came from and was it a cause for deforestation or degraded forest.
That's exactly right.
Gee, okay. One of the things I noticed on the website too is you come from a family that has a tree farm, right?
That's right. My family.
This is going to be important to you.
It is. My family owns a little tree farm in Greene County, Mississippi, right on the Alabama border. So I didn't go to forestry school, but I have a real life education in forestry issues and, how forest owners make decisions about the future and about what they want to do in the future. And to me, that is why this law is so concerning, is the European Union is having consequences that they don't realize. And what will happen is EUDR is not the cause of all of the problems in the United States when it comes to forestry, but it could very well be the straw that broke the camel's back. And for a forest owner, we used to have many options of mills, pulp and paper mills, sawmills, pellet mills to sell our harvests. Mm-hmm. And those options have reduced significantly over time. And when there isn't competition in a wood basket, that is not good for the landowner. And eventually, landowners will choose to do something different with their land. And that breaks my heart because forests are the most beautiful way you can use your land, I think.
Is there no comprehension of you need resources in order to have land and keep it healthy? I mean, it doesn't just exist and is going to be okay. I mean, managed forests are important. That's where you kind of cut down on disease and insects and things of that nature. And it keeps it healthier than if you just would leave it go on by itself. Take me through a process of you as a tree farmer to sell your wood under the EUDR regulations. What would you have to do? Walk me through that.
Well, we are third-party certified. So a lot of the things that we do for third-party certification is not a rubber stamp for EUDR compliance, but it certainly is helpful. Mm-hmm. And so for us, that would be kind of a helpful due diligence exercise that's going to occur anyway. For us, my family would like to keep our land forested. So we know that we are going to replant, and that's part of how my family operates is every time we harvest, we hold some back so that we can reinvest in the forest moving forward. So for us, the deforestation issue should be easy to clear. We plan to replant. That's the way we've decided to operate as a family. The forest degradation is what gives me pause. Right now, my forests in Mississippi, the people that live nearby there are in their 70s. And the most problematic part of EUDR compliance is around geolocation. You have to provide a polygon of your harvest area, which means not just a single GIS point, but a polygon of the outline of your harvest area. That is not something that my 70-year-old aunts are going to do. So they're going to have to hire somebody. They're going to have to rely on somebody else to draw a geolocation polygon for them. And that is the core of the problem. That is drawing a geolocation polygon for a large company is expensive and not what anybody wants to do, but they can do it. But for a small family forest owner, drawing a polygon really eats into the amount of money that you're going to make from that harvest and your ability to hold money back to reinvest in your forest. And so the geolocation requirements around this law are a prime example of what doesn't work in a country that's low risk for deforestation, decided by the European Union to be low risk. For a small operator that's going to harvest once every couple decades, drawing a polygon does not sound like a big deal if you are in Brussels, Belgium, but it is a big deal if you are relying on that money to reinvest in your forest and maybe send your kids to college. It eats into the benefit of having a forest. And so what the law is doing is it's hitting a landowner when they're at their most sensitive time to decide, do we want to reinvest in this forest for another 25, 30, 40, 50 years? Many landowners will say, it's not worth it anymore. I don't have the competition in the wood basket to sell my wood in the first place. Mm-hmm. They're asking me for more and more and more and more information. Eventually, landowners are going to throw in the towel and say, enough is enough. I'm going to plant blueberries, or I'm going to put in a solar farm, or I'm going to sell to a developer and be done with it entirely. And that is the unfortunate nature of what this law will actually do. It is the unintended consequences that we can see coming. We want to make sure that they can see them coming too. So that's what we're up against, is we are managing sustainably. We can do due diligence all day to show that we're managing sustainably, but some of these really prescriptive requirements are just a huge burden. 70-year-old ants drawing a polygon of their harvest unit, get out of here.
Wow. Man, it sounds like the regulation is going to do the exact opposite of what it intended to do.
We did a survey of landowners in the United States, and in total, it represented about probably about 20 million hectares of forest land, so 40-some million acres of forest land in the United States across 20 states, something like that. So not the entire forest supply chain, not the entire forest landowner community, but a large portion. 43% of the landowners surveyed, mostly small landowners, said they're considering conversion to another land use. Wow. That is what kills me about this law. It is going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Landowners who are investing in their forest, who are investing in long-term sustainability, there is no benefit, there is no incentive for those that are already doing the right thing.
If we are going to look at less competition and discouraging landowners to keep the forests, how do we turn that around without getting the EUDR to either be modified or go away? Or either one of those things a possibility?
Well, I stole this from my colleague, but I think it's true. If we were in the beef business, it would be like our slaughterhouse being on the side of the highway. Everyone can see what we do. And so if you have a clear cut and it's visible from space and satellite monitoring from the highway nearby, that's what gets people emotional about it, because a clear cut, let's face it, is not pretty. But we all know that the long-term nature of sustainable forest management means most people are going to reinvest in that forest, make sure it becomes a forest again. If you come back to it in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, it's going to be beautiful. We know that. But the reality is that does trigger a lot of emotion in a lot of people. And it's hard to see the difference between a sustainable, well-done clear cut in Greene County, Mississippi. It looks exactly the same to the uneducated viewer as deforestation in the Amazon. It looks the same. And so for us, this is about differentiating the United States from the bad actors in the world that is in the mind of the European policymakers. We are making some good progress there, but we're behind. I think the reality is the European Union does not understand how the American landowner operates, how they make decisions, who their customers are, how interdependent the supply chain is, how tough the economic conditions are for a forest owner right now. We're trying to keep our land forested. They are making it more difficult. And so for us, it is very important. We are screaming from the mountaintops in Brussels that this is going to do the exact opposite of what you intended. We've gotten some good guidance on forest degradation that makes it workable in the United States, but the geolocation requirements, some of the fundamental flaws in this piece of legislation that does not allow for any flexibility for low-risk countries, for low-risk supply chains, the law has to be reopened for those things to be addressed. And the commission has a political problem. They cannot reopen the law and send it back to the other bodies of government without the other bodies of government killing it. And so this is a political problem. I think we are finally making some progress with them understanding the problem, at least nominally. What we need to do is make sure they understand the impact. And I think what seems to be resonating is that this is going to do the exact opposite of what they intended. And when the EU's deforestation regulation starts to drive forest conversion in places like the United States, Canada, New Zealand, that is going to set environmental policy back decades. And so for us, we need to make sure that they can see the impacts, that we're quantifying the impacts, and that we're continuing to be the squeaky wheel. I have made it abundantly clear, you heard on that call that you were referencing earlier, I'm not going away. I will continue to be here, and in a year when we start to see forest conversion happening, particularly among small landowners that cannot bear the burden, I will be back in the European Commission saying, I told you so. Now what are we going to do to fix it? Now the law goes into effect at the end of this year. There are many ways that this could be derailed. For example, they have an information system that they have built to collect all of the enormous amounts of data that they are requiring. The information system does not appear to be working as well as it should be. And in the year 2026, if you can't handle the amount of data that you have required, you really got to look in the mirror. Is this the most realistic way to do this? I don't think so. So for us, if you can't handle the enormous amounts of data that you've required, that is a symptom of the problem. You have required way too much information. So we're hoping that thing fails, and it very well might. But I think we should all plan for the worst and hope for the best. I think we should plan for the law to go into enforcement at the end of the year.
Do you think there is a chance it could go back and be revisited in the union?
The law has baked into it a review clause, so it has to be reviewed by 2030. So I think that would be the next realistic chance for the law to be significantly revisited. But 2030 is a long way away if you're a forest owner looking to harvest and make a return on your investment. So we're not going to wait for 2030. We're going to make it clear what is happening in the United States as a result of this law as we go, so that they are fully aware of the repercussions of this really myopic approach.
There's been at least one, for maybe two delays on this law. Is there possible we could get to December and they say, well, maybe we can wait a little bit, another year, maybe wait another year before it gets into full force?
It's possible. Anything is possible. And I think if the information system does not work, if that crashes and burns, if the competent authorities, the regulators who are at the ports who will have to determine what comes in and what's compliant and what's not, if they don't have the resources they need, the law can't go into enforcement. So there certainly could be a delay. I think that this law is haphazard in many ways. And so, unfortunately, we're bearing the brunt of how clumsy the law was put together. But eventually, the chickens will come home to roost in the European Union at some point. Whether that happens before the end of the year or not, I don't know. I certainly hope so. But the political reality right now is that they are not willing to reopen the law.
Wow. And there's no chance that the current administration or Congress could have some sort of influence in the European Union to make changes, or at least make some either concessions for the United States or to another delay tactic, or even force them to revisit the law.
Yeah, the administration has been very engaged pushing back on the European Union and some of the very specific challenges around implementation, things like geolocation. In the US-EU trade deal that was just finalized this month, there is a reference to EUDR and a commitment for the EU to open an official dialogue with the US and stakeholders like me, like you, to hear our concerns. So far, that has largely been a check-the-box exercise on the European Union's part, but the US government continues to push back and hold their feet to the fire. So we're encouraging the Trump administration to continue to keep this on their list of priority issues to address with the European Union. We'll continue to keep pressure on. But like I said, they've painted themselves into a political corner, and it's going to be very hard for them to get out of it at this point. And so something drastic will need to happen in order for this to get delayed again. And some possibilities of drastic things happening before the end of the year, but it's hard to say.
Well, we'll have to wait and see about that. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you wanted to cover about EUDR? And it is an important subject, I think, to a lot of our folks here in Louisiana, and certainly throughout the United States, especially Southeast United States, where we do so much to keep forests as forests.
The only thing I would add is the U.S. forestry community has really banded together to push back on this. And so the entire supply chain, large companies, small companies, all the associations, we are all working together to push back. And that is a good thing. We're working with the U.S. government to push back, to highlight some of the unintended consequences that are already clear and already happening. And we're just going to have to keep on. So we're doing the best we can do. And I would like to think that this is going to go away at some point, whether it goes away in 2026 or goes away in 2030. I think the law was so clumsily put together that it cannot work the way it was intended. And so push will come to shove at some point.
Kate Gatto, she's the Chief Strategy Officer for the National Alliance of Forest Landowners. Thank you so much, Kate. I appreciate you joining us, and we hope we have you again sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Mind of the Forest. This episode was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the SFI, the LFA and its programs, and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and the forest products industry in Louisiana, check out our website at laforestry.com. We have 14 episodes of Mind of the Forest each year, and you can help support sustainable forestry by being a Mind of the Forest sponsor. Send me an email at jzeringue at laforestry.com. That's jzeringue at laforestry.com and find out more. We're always looking for topics that might be of interest to you, our audience. So if you have a topic suggestion, send me an email to that same address, jzeringue at laforestry.com. Our contact information and the contact information of our guests in this episode can be found on our show notes, so check that out if you will. Also, you can subscribe to Mind of the Forest by clicking on the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app, like the Apple Podcast or Spotify. And now we're on YouTube, so look for that as well. Be sure to tap on the notification button as well when you subscribe. That way you'll know when a new episode drops each month. Thank you. We really appreciate you doing that. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're Mind of the Forest for you.